You're listening to Empowered to Lead, the Therapist Practice. I'm Lisa Catello, therapist, business coach, and your go-to for all things leadership and sustainable practice growth. This is your space for real talk, smart strategies, and grounded support to help you lead with confidence, work with intention, and build a business that actually works for you. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome back to the Empowered to Lead podcast. This is a space for therapists and group practice owners who care about leading well and being empowered to do that in a way that feels authentic within you and the practice that you are building. And today we are talking about our having clarity about our culture. Last episode, we talked about what makes a team enjoyable to lead. How do you create a team that you actually enjoy leading rather than just there's people filling seats, and where things can go wrong as you are leading a group practice. And a lot of what came up pointed to one root issue or topic, and that is clarity. So clarity about your values, clarity about your expectations, clarity about how your team culture actually shows up day to day, clarity about what you're trying to create and accomplish within your group practice. So today I want to follow up on that and give you something that is practical. I'm going to walk you through a culture clarity checklist. Say that 3 times really fast. And this is basically 3 layers that all together are going to inform you about whether your culture is defined, communicated, and if it's actually alive within your practice. A lot of times we think people know what we're trying to create, or we think we've tried to instill our values and people are in alignment, and then all of a sudden we are knocked off our feet by lack of information or lack of buy-in. And so today, we're going to help you clarify that. So if you are a group practice connection member, I want you to go and access the Cultivate Your Team worksheet from Module 6 as you listen. You can pull that up out of Mighty Networks because this episode builds directly on that work and on that resource. So layer 1. Let's start with the foundation. What have you defined? So before you can lead a culture, you have to know what you're leading toward. You are the leader. You're empowered to lead. You are the one that started this group practice. And so you are the one that is defining and starting the culture that you want for that business. And so we're going to go through a few specific questions to help you identify what is that culture that you're wanting. And I don't know about you, but a lot of times when we start something, we're all excited, we're idealistic, we've got this plan, and we just start digging in and making it happen. And we don't actually slow down and go, okay, what is it that I'm creating? What would happen if something went awry? How would I want to handle that? What am I actually standing for? Why am I doing this? Why am I making clients fill out a form? Why are we doing consultations? Why do I do quarterly meetings with my team? Oh, because everyone else around me is doing that. Well, we want to make this specific to you. In an age where people buy into you, into what you're selling, quote unquote, if you were not watching this, in an age where they want to feel like they are contributing towards something that is important and that aligns with them, you want to identify your core values. And not just for your clinical work, for who you are as a clinician or how you want to be taking care of clients who come through the door, but also for how your practice operates. Do your team members know what those values are? So slow down with that. What does that mean if I identify my core values, not just for clinical work, but for how my practice operates? So this is something that I do with every coaching client when I get started is what are your core values? What are you wanting to be the basis, the foundation for what you're providing. What makes you stand out from others? So it could be, we're going to be trauma informed. How does that play out? We're going to be client centered. How does that play out? How do my team members know what those values are? How are you communicating that? Where is it communicated? The next question I want you to consider is, have you defined your ideal therapist? So if you've been listening to my podcast, if you continue to listen, you're going to hear this term quite often, your ideal therapist. This doesn't mean that you're going to fill up your whole practice with mini-me's or with people who perfectly fit this ideal. But if you don't know what you're aiming for, you're going to get random outliers. I know I did to start with before I really sat down and go, who do I actually want to work with? I don't want to just fill a seat because that's not working. I want to have people who buy in and they look like this. So not only you want to consider what kind of clinical modalities they bring, who they want to work with, what clientele they serve, but also who are they as a person? What do they like to do? What do they not like to do? How do they fit with the culture that you're trying to build? So this matters more than you think when you're hiring. If you have a whole group of therapists who are go-getters and initiators, and then you bring on someone who is not, they're more of a bystander, how do they fit in with that culture? And maybe you want a couple of those in there to balance it out. But if you're not intentional about that, that can affect your team culture. Another question I want you to consider is, have you articulated a vision for your culture beyond what it looks like on paper? So you can name your core values, you can write pretty little scripts about them, but how does that play out? How do you imagine that showing up? So what does it feel like for someone to be on your team? What are they experiencing as a result of these core values? What do you want people to say about working with you, both while they're with you and when they leave? How would they speak about what the culture is at your group practice? A lot of times we have a sense of this, like I've said, and we know this. We have a general view, or we can kind of say it, but we don't actually write it down, and don't write it down in a way that actually guides your decisions. So one of the things that writing down your core values does is it shapes who you're attracting as clients, who you're attracting as therapists, what we're talking about right now, what the culture looks like, what your decisions are going to be when it comes to growth. And so spell them out. And spell them out. There might be 3 different versions of it. So there might be a version for the group practice at large. There might be a version for how do we articulate those values when it comes to clients? How do we articulate that for the therapist that we're trying to bring on? And then how do we articulate those values as it relates to the culture that we're trying to create? If those values only live in your head, they can't actually do the work that they're meant to do. They need to be visible and in a way that you can come back to them when things get hard, or when you're making a hiring decision under pressure. How do they line up with your core values? Have it written down. The second layer that you want to look at is, what have you communicated? So having the culture defined and spelling it out, having it on all of those places like we just talked about, is different from how am I communicating that. And this layer is about the gap between the two. So here's some things to consider. We talked quite a bit in the last episode about expectations. How are you clear about the expectations? So what I want you to consider now with this layer is, do your team members know your expectations? Not just the logistical ones. This is how we book a client. This is how you invoice. This is how you do a consult. Not just those things, but the cultural ones. And this is a sore point for a lot of us. What does it mean to show up well in your practice? And what are your non-negotiables? And where are you kind of like, this is okay? So thinking of a couple different examples of group practice owners that I've worked with or how I have thought I wanted things to be. So some people expect monthly team meetings. Everybody shows up in person. Some people expect no team meetings. So I don't want a meeting. I want people who are coming in and don't want meetings. There are people who are happy to come in and do their job and leave. Those are very different expectations of culture, both for you and for your therapist. What are some other logistical ones versus cultural? So celebrating birthdays, that could be something the people are coming in and they want to be a part of something. They want to feel celebrated. They want to feel like they're recognized. And you are somebody who is not a good recognizer, or that's not something that you want to do. You want to be very clear. So if you are, you have heard me say this before. One of my love languages is quality time. And one of the reasons I started a group practice was because I didn't want to do this all alone. I wanted to have people around me. I wanted to have a team atmosphere. And so for me, that meant regular team meetings and everybody showing up. And it was so disappointing when some people wouldn't show up. Maybe the time didn't work. Maybe they forgot, whatever it was. I started to resent some people. And then looking back, I didn't actually set that clear expectation. So when you can integrate that into your whole interviewing, hiring process, into the onboarding. So if it is non-negotiable for you, I know one group practice owner where she sets this in her contract, actually, where we have 12 monthly meetings a year. You're expected to show up at 10 of them. Out of 12, you're free to not be at 2 out of the whole year. And so people sign that contract. They know that this is an expectation. How are you being clear about those expectations for the culture that you have? Are your expectations written down somewhere that your team can actually find them once they're done the onboarding process? Or do they live in conversations that some people had and others didn't? I thought I had communicated that. How do you not know that? We talk about that around the water cooler all the time. But somebody who's there on a Saturday hasn't heard that conversation. So do you have standard operating procedures? Do you have a welcome aboard package? Do you have onboarding meetings that are explaining this is what the culture is here? These are some of the expectations that we have of our team, and setting those clear and accessible. How do they find it? Reminding them how they can go back and look at that. When you bring someone new onto your team, so I've been talking about this a bit already, is culture part of your onboarding, or does it only come sometimes when something goes sideways? A lot of us don't have specific onboarding meetings. Set out those onboarding meetings. This sets all of you up for success. A lot of you are saying, I'm tired of being asked the same questions. How come they don't know how to do this? Or like, how do they not know how to book a session in Jane? Well, not everybody uses Jane exactly the way that you do. So set out 3 or 4 onboarding meetings, go through the logistics, how they show up in your practice, and then have one of those onboarding meetings be, this is what our culture is like. These are things that we invite you into as a result of being a part of this group practice. And these are things that, if you can make it, it would be awesome. And if you can't be a part of that, that's not something that will affect our culture overall or be a disappointment. Another question you want to consider is, do you communicate your values consistently in team meetings and how you give feedback and how you handle problems? That consistency speaks also to communication, that the clear expectations, all of that in there. So the gap between defined and communicated is where most of the tension lives. You know what you value. You assume that your team does too. But as we know, assumptions become resentments. And when coming back to what I had shared last time again, so Brene Brown says clear is kind. And that's true in both directions. It's kind to your team and it protects you. It has clear expectations. You've got clear communication. Everybody knows where they stand and what's expected. The third layer is, what are you actually doing? So this is the part that the Cultivate Your Team worksheet speaks to most directly. That's in Group Practice Connection. This is where culture either lives or it doesn't. So some questions to consider with this. How does connection actually show up in your group practice right now? Take a moment and think about time together in a business setting, time in a more relaxed setting. No, people are leaving after session. Everybody's kind of shutting down, closing the office. What about time and social opportunities? So whether that's a summer barbecue or a holiday party, does what's happening in each of those areas match with what you said you wanted or what you have said that your core values are, what your expectations are of people? Another question I want you to consider is, who owns your culture? And sometimes we're like, I'm tired of carrying all the load. Why don't people pitch in a little bit more? Well, if they don't really know what is expected or what the culture is supposed to be, how can they check in? Or have you asked them specifically to be a part of creating and contributing to culture? So who owns your culture? If things are supposed to happen consistently, like check-ins, team meetings, quarterly meetings, celebrations, there's a baby, there's a birthday, somebody bought a house, peer consultation, who's actually responsible for making sure that these consistent things happen? Do they know that they are responsible for that? And so you might have an admin team, or you might have somebody who's really social and you just kind of offhandedly say, hey, could you take care of this? Be clear. Let them know what the expectation is and how it helps you to create and cultivate the culture of your group practice. Does your vision of culture fit the model you've built? And this is a little bit of where people get stuck sometimes. So if your team is mostly contractors who work independently, a culture of close daily connection, we're going to show up for all the team meetings, we're going to go to all the social activities, we're going to go to the hikes on the weekend, that may not be realistic. And so are your expectations actually aligned with the structure that you have in place? It may be time to review your expectations of the people under that structure or how you want to structure that. Maybe something has shifted for you to either you want more independence or you want more buy-in. And what does that mean for how you set up your business? And then you want to consider what happens when something goes wrong. So when there's a conflict, when you notice that values are misaligned or there's a difficult conversation that needs to happen, do you address it or do you avoid it? Because avoidance can also be a sign or a culture signal that something's mismatched here. Either that person is not the best fit for the team, or I am not standing in what I actually believe is important, or I've said this is important and I find it really hard to put that into action. Or what's going wrong there? How do I want to address that? How do I want to address that based on what I have said our core values are? Lots of questions to consider today. Are you leading from your values consistently, or does your leadership shift depending on how stressed you are or how much you need people to stay? You're like, holding on. Yeah, we can do that. I talked to somebody who had provided in a month, there were 12 different types of meetings or connection points that were happening. And she was in charge of all of them. So imagine that. That's 3 a week. And she was starting to resent if people showed up. She was starting to resent if they didn't show up. And so we really needed to hone in. What are your core values? Why did you start these meetings? Are they still serving the same purpose? And are they speaking to who you want to be as a leader? Are you able to show up consistently and authentically? So this here is a layer that separates the intention from the reality. You can have a beautifully defined culture. You can have your values really pretty and communicate it clearly. But if your actions don't back it up, if you avoid the hard conversations, if you hire against your own criteria when you're desperate, if you celebrate your top 20%, but you actually resent everybody else, your team is going to feel that. Culture isn't what you say it is, it's what you do when things are hard. Let's repeat that, because that kind of stands out for me. Culture isn't what you say it is, it's what you do when things are hard. And if you haven't defined it, if you're not walking in alignment with it, if you haven't communicated it, it's really hard to hold true to that and to show up when things are hard consistently. So, GPC members, Group Practice Connection members, this is where your Cultivate Your Team worksheet gets real. It asks you to sit with the difference between what you dream about for your team and what is actually sustainable given your time, your model, and your ideal therapist. And I want you to revisit that page with fresh eyes after this episode. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out the Group Practice Connection and come and join us. We've got a bunch of resources and we've got accountability support to help you stay on track as an empowered leader. I try to end every episode with a leadership challenge. So here we go. I'm going to encourage you to pick one layer, just one layer of everything that we talked about here, where you know that there's a gap right now. Not the layer that feels the most overwhelming, but the one where a single, honest action and effort can make a real difference. So maybe that's writing down your top 5 values and putting them somewhere visible for your next team meeting, spelling it out for yourself, and then talking to your team. Does this align with what you know about our group practice? Is there something that we need to tweak based on what we've built so far? Maybe it's rewriting your onboarding process so that you include a culture conversation. Maybe it's creating an onboarding process and including that in there. And maybe it's finally addressing something that's been sitting in your practice that you've been hoping will resolve on its own, but it's really butting up against the culture that you are trying to create. Name the gap, name the action, and give it a deadline. So as we close, there's a lot of information in there. I'm going to provide a downloadable culture clarity checklist. It'll be in the show notes. For GPC members, I'm going to encourage you to revisit Module 6, Cultivate Your Team worksheet, because that takes this exercise just a little bit further. And either way, email me, lisa@grouppracticenetwork.ca. I want to hear what you take away from this and how you start to articulate, first of all, how you establish, how you articulate and communicate your core values and the culture that you are trying to create in your group practice. If you are finding that you need some extra encouragement or you want some inspiration from others who have done this, who are in the same boat as you are, check out grouppracticenetwork.ca retreats or congruent practice. There's a couple of retreats that I am hosting. And I think that is one of the most powerful times, is to get away from your group practice, connect with people, talk shop, and really find solutions and tips and ways of showing up the way that you want to be as a group practice owner. And if retreating isn't for you, it's too hard to get away, join the Group Practice Connection membership. So we have 3 calls a month. We're connecting. We're having conversations like this. We're challenging each other, supporting each other, solving little problems and big problems, and just being in a space where you know that you are not alone. So that is grouppracticenetwork.ca/the-group-connection. And I hope that you will join us. As we wrap up here today, my hope for you is that as you work through some of these tips, go back and play it again, pause it when you come to some of the questions, take the time. I want you to walk away feeling more empowered, more authentic, more stepping into who you are and want to be as a leader for yourself and for the people on your team. Have a great day. Give us a 5-star review. Share this with someone that you know needs some of this information and encouragement. And we'll chat again next week. Thanks for hanging out with me on Empowered to Lead, the Therapist Practice. I hope you're walking away with something that you can put into action, because leadership isn't about doing more, it's about leading with purpose. If you're ready for deeper support, I'd love to see you inside the Group Practice Connection, my monthly membership where Canadian therapists like you get coaching, community, and the tools to build a business that actually supports your life. You can check it out at grouppracticenetwork.ca. The link's in the show notes. And hey, don't forget to hit follow so you don't miss what's coming next. We're building something great here, and I'm so glad you're a part of it.